This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 270, NEDCamp Retro. Welcome to Talking Drupal. We're fresh off NEDCamp 2020, and today we reflect on it. Joining us to discuss the camp is Rick Hood. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, glad to be here.
Rick is a perennial guest for those longtime listeners. Rick Hood is a Drupal developer currently with Common Media since 2011. He's a Nerd Summit organizer also since 2011, and he's been helping out with NEDCamp since 2016. He was also a freelance graphic designer, web developer from 2000 to 2010, so a lot of experience in the web world. Before that, he was the president and COO of Hood Enterprises, boat building and service in Portsmouth, Taiwan, and Singapore. Rick last joined us in March to discuss one of the first virtual camps after COVID-19 started hitting the United States, Nerd Summit. So welcome back, Rick.
Thanks.
So, Rick, I got to break in here for a second and ask a question. So we're going to get into our primary topic, which is obviously NEDCamp, and you ran a Drupal journey BOF at NEDCamp. I'm just curious, how did you go from boat building to Drupal?
Oh, yeah, that's quite a story, sort of. Well, when I was in the boat building business, this guy was working with me one day said, hey, come on with me at lunchtime. I want you to meet somebody. So we went down to Newport and we met this guy named Mark Bisline, who at the time was doing interactive DVDs for private schools where like you take a tour of the private school, and he was using Macromedia Director to do that with. So I just remember walking out of there saying, man, I want to be doing this someday. So I got Director and learned that and quickly realized you need stuff to put in it. So I got Photoshop and fell in love with that. And then eventually, DVDs went away and the web came along. So I just got into the web and started doing Flash, because Flash was a little bit like Macromedia Director. And anyways, the interesting thing is that Mark Bisline is the guy who started Schoolyard.
Schoolyard, right? Yeah, I thought that name was familiar.
Which I think all of us have worked on at one point or another.
Yeah.
So it's a super
but
small world.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Schoolyard was a sponsor in the very first NEDCamp, first year.
And Jason used to work for them.
Yes, exactly.
And I used to work for Jason. She just keeps getting interweaved. You just keep going.
Joining us this week, as usual, Stephen Cross with Parallax Info Technology. What's new with you this week?
So the last show we released, 269, was super educational for me. It's home automation and inspiring. And I've gone on this home automation kick here. So
Stephen hasn't left his cave since 269, finished recording, and has just been automating his home ever since.
I haven't gone crazy, but I've learned a lot of stuff. So I think since 269, that show was split into 2 episodes over 5 days. So I already told you that I got home automation, home assistant running. Yeah, and since that, so the past week since then, I've installed a motion detector with Z-Wave, and now when you walk downstairs into my basement area, which has a rec room and a boiler room and a laundry room, all the lights turn on, and then they turn off when someone leaves, and there's no motion after 10 minutes. So it's just fun, and I've been playing with presents in the last couple of days. So in my office, my light, I've always had this automation it was with Apple Kit or HomeKit first, and then I switched it over to Home Assistant recently. Is my light turns on in my office at 5:15 because I'm usually at my desk by 5:30, so it automatically turns on. Now it only turns on if I'm in the house, and and it turns off at 9 in the morning automatically, unless I leave the house early. So today I had a doctor's appointment at 8:30. So my light was on when I left in my office, and as I drove away, I checked the Home Assistant and it did turn off when I was about a mile from my house.
Side note, I believe you can do that with HomeKit within Apple automations.
Sure you can. Yeah. I'm sure you can. Yep. It was just been fun to kind of play with that stuff. So, and another interesting thing is that my wife is just getting a kick out of this, is that like when I got the motion detector, I'm like having to test it. Like I set it up in the bathroom just to try it. And I'm like, can you go in the bathroom and see if things work? And she's just laughing her head off at me because I didn't have the scripts written right and they didn't work for days and days until I figured out what the heck was going on. So she was just like, just rolling her eyes as like lights. Cause I brought the basement lights up into the living room and plugged them into lamps so I could test the stuff. And these lights are going on and off and she's just laughing at me. So it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to learn these things and get them working. It's satisfying once you get it working.
Yeah, for sure.
Also joining us this week as usual is John Picozzi with Oomph. What's new with you this week?
So truth be told, I've been thinking more about home automation too. I haven't acted on any of that, but I've been thinking about it. But I will say over the last couple of weeks, I got back into working on my personal website, and it was the simplest thing. I basically updated the footer of my personal website to add some like promotional content, like books I'm interested in, products I may or may not have mentioned or that I've used that I kind of, think are worthwhile. But like just getting back into the website and kind of tinkering, getting back into, working with Drupal and Lando and all that stuff, because that's no longer really my day to day, was super fun. So, just a reminder that getting back into those side projects can be a good time, and people should do it.
Very good. And for me this week, as usual, I'm also joining you. I'm not a guest this week. I'm back to being in the host role. I'm Nick with Enlightened Development, and the update that I have for you this week is sometimes it's worth, I'm sure people have heard this, but sometimes it's worth just taking a little bit of extra effort and going to manufacturers' websites. My snowblower broke a couple of years ago. One of the the handle that controls the auger, didn't lock on, so I ended up having to just kind of tie it down, which isn't the safest thing. And when I went to fix it this year, one of the bolts snapped. And so I was kind of resigned to just having to send it to, one of those engine shops, small engine shops that kind of takes care of these types of things and lawnmowers and that kind of thing. And so I found a company that does pickup, and they wanted, something like $350 to pick it up, do a tune up and fix the part. And so Joanna convinced me to take a second look at it. And it turns out that the company Troy built has a part picker that shows a diagram of the snowblower. And so you can literally just point at the part that's broken and they'll put it in your cart for you. So using that, I was able to find out that the reason why it broke wasn't the part that actually broke, but another part that was broken from when I received it from Lowe's. Thanks a lot, Lowe's. And so the two parts that I needed, actually three parts that I needed, ended up being, $25 total, something like that. And it took me about 20 minutes to replace. It hasn't snowed again since I fixed it, but
that's it's really heartwarming. That's that story. Not so much the fact that you fixed your snowblower, but that your wife had the faith in you to tell you to try to fix it again. Because most wives might be like, why don't you get a professional to do that? Yeah. So, I'm happy that you fixed your snowblower, but
Nick, I'm guessing the 7 or 8 inches you got last week was the inspiration to get this thing done.
No, actually, I found the parts maybe 3 or 4 days before it snowed, and the part showed up the day after it snowed.
Okay.
And I actually had to wait a couple of days till it warmed up again. But yeah, I fixed it up, and it should be good to go. So yeah, a lot of things are getting harder to fix, but some things like this are still can be done. And as we mentioned at the top, also joining us this week is Rick with Common Media. What's new with you this week?
Yeah, I've been since July, I guess maybe because of COVID, I jumped back into music production. I'd done that 20 years earlier, but I just decided to get back into it. So that's been fun, using Apple's Logic. And then later on, I switched over to Ableton Live.
Ableton.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm about 2/3 of the way through a month-long course right now with a guy named Andrew Wong. That's Huang. He's unbelievable. Go look at his YouTube channel sometime. So that's what I've been doing, keeping myself busy with that. And if you want to listen to my stuff, I call myself Float at SoundCloud. So that's FLOWTE.
The link
I
is
have
in
to
the
say,
show notes.
yeah, I have to say, I've been listening to it all morning. It's definitely the kind of music I like. It's definitely the kind of music I like to code to. You know, it's the kind of thing that I can focus on what I'm doing. It doesn't distract.
Instrumental?
It's really high quality. No,
Who's doing the vocals, Rick?
Those are clips that I got.
Yeah.
So you can get clips to vocals. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, it's definitely good quality. I mean, it's not, sometimes I have friends that have done music production and you have to kind of sit there and go, yeah, this is good. But
I think we should call Rick moving forward the Renaissance man, right? We got boat building, website design. He didn't talk about his publishing at this point, but I know he's done publishing in the past, web development. The list goes on and on. Right now, production, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely check it out. Like Steven said, it's in the show notes.
So before we get into our primary topic today, a few things regarding the show. We recently found out there was a feed broken, one of our RSS feeds. The feed that was particularly feeding Spotify and Google, I think those are the two that were off. If you were getting stuff from Apple, you were okay. So those feeds have been updated. Just a reminder, people, you can find Talking Drupal on Apple, Google, Spotify. There's a bunch of other Stitcher and stuff. Those places, we don't specifically go after them, but they've picked us up, and always YouTube. So if you were missing shows since August on your feeder, they've probably fixed now. So we apologize for that. And
welcome back, because otherwise, if we hadn't fixed it, you wouldn't have gotten this notification.
True. Yeah, thank you.
So moving on to our primary topic this week. So we are talking about NEDCamp. So all of us have been on the team for a long time now, helping organize NEDCamp each year. NEDCamp is an annual Drupal camp for the New England area. And we just had the camp this past Friday. So today is Tuesday. It's so fresh. We haven't even had a chance to have the organizers kind of post recap meeting where we kind of talk about what went well, what we need to do next year, and kind of go through the feedback. So this is really a fresh take of kind of how the camp went.
For any regular listeners, you probably know of NEDCamp, but for anyone who's relatively new, New England Drupal Camp, nedcamp.org. This is the 7th year we've had it. It's generally an in-person conference that moves around, or has moved around New England. We've kind of settled into Rhode Island the last couple of years. It's a small camp. We get between 100 and 200 people. It's really a great opportunity every year for people in New England to get together face to face for a day. We have a 1-day camp. Actually, that's not true. It's usually 2 days. Sorry. It's 1 day of training and then 1 day of sessions. So it's been around 7 years, and Nick, John, and I started this thing back 7 years ago. Also, Ellen Diamond was on the first camp team that year. And since then, the camp team has grown. Rick is with us this year, has been with us for a number of years now. So go to nedcamp.org, and you missed the camp this year, but keep an eye on us for next year.
You can join our mailing list.
So 2020 had some changes to the format. John, you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, 2020 had some changes to a lot of people's format, unfortunately. But our format, particularly at NEDCamp, when we started planning this, we were looking at, we were looking at November having our camp, which, when we started planning, it was, early in the year. We were thinking maybe by November we could have an in-person camp. We quickly realized that was not going to be the case. So we came down to two possibilities: going fully virtual, doing kind of the session-based camp, or we had this idea of doing BOFCon, which a BOF is for folks that are not familiar with that term, is birds of a feather. Basically, a conversation between a bunch of like-minded individuals. So as we started planning, we kind of got more comfortable with the idea of a BOFCon. And we decided, hey, we're going to do this virtually. We're going to do a BOFCon, and we're going to have a one-day event in November. And we were able to work with our venue at the time to kind of back out of our contract. They were more than happy to let us out of there.
That's an important note, is that we started planning the camp a year ago. So by the time COVID hit, we had already had a contract in place with the venue.
Right. Yeah. We
typically generally
start pretty early in that process.
Yeah. And just to kind of give a little more detail, birds of a feather, for those not familiar with the term, it's more of a group discussion. So typically when you go to a session, there's one or two presenters, they have a slideshow, maybe a demo, or maybe something interactive. And they talk about some topic, a case study, something interesting they've worked on, something new in the field. And there's usually a Q&A after, but the majority of the session is not particularly interactive. Like you're learning something, you're hearing somebody's perspective. And a BOF, which is typically kind of a side track at camps and cons, people organize them themselves, but they're a group discussion. People say, hey, we want to talk about this topic at this time. And anybody, that might be how to respond to RFPs. It might be how do you, start design, the design process, and anybody interested in that topic will show up and kind of have a discussion about it.
I was just going to say, the reason around, choosing, this sort of format and this sort of, this sort of way of approaching kind of a conference was really to be different. We had all, and when talking about whether to have the conference in a virtual format or not, just to skip 2020 altogether, what I think most people gravitated towards with this idea was the fact that it was not the same old conference of like going to a session, listen to somebody speak. And, I think that's important, bringing people together in this kind of format to have those conversations in, a day and age where they can't get together in real life, was super important and a lot of why we chose this format.
And I think, I was going to say, Rick, I think was one of the things that helped us point towards that, because we were having this discussion in March, and in March, a lot of conferences like Nerd Summit went virtual. And if you want to hear more about how that went, we have that show that we had back in March where Rick talked about the Nerd Summit sessions. And we, as John said, we wanted to do something different than would be typical, I think, we thought at this point. And
that was going to be my next point there, was that Rick was kind of pivotal in helping us make this decision, simply because he had Nerd Summit early in 2020, and then they went virtual, and they had a lot of experience with the virtual format. So he was a really valuable team member this year, I think.
Rick, I'm curious to know, you're the one who recommended or brought to the table the idea of the BOF. Do you remember where that came from and why you suggested that?
Yeah, it's because when we did Nerd Summit, my favorite part of the Nerd Summit were the I think we call them coffee rooms or something, or coffee talks, where they're just informal places to gather and talk. And Kelly, who's the main organizer of Nerd Summit, Kelly Albrecht, he did some things where like he would throw out a question and then send people into break rooms to discuss it. And then they would come back and talk about what they like one question might be, what will be the title of your autobiography or something like that. And anyways, that whole interaction thing I found a lot more interesting than just listening to a speaker, because listening to a speaker in a virtual conference feels too much to me like I could watch this video later. Whereas a meeting where you're discussing things feels a lot closer to an in-person thing. We're actually, talking to people.
Had you received feedback from the attendees that kind of format was something they enjoyed?
Not that I remember.
It's just something you observed yourself? Yeah. Okay.
I think we'll talk more about the structure in a bit, but for me, I think the format was a resounding success. I mean, I think if we had just session after session, 4 or 5 sessions in a row would be a lot just to be listening to online. Whereas when it's an in-person conference, you're taking notes, you're sitting next to people, you're chatting with people in the hall between, you're going to lunch. But for a virtual conference, you don't really have that. And we still had a more traditional keynote, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I feel like when it was discussion, and I feel like most people in most rooms were participating, that almost every time it was like, oh wow, the time's already up. We got to go to the next session block or BOF block. I think that the format was an extreme success, and it just felt, closer than the Zoom webinar process looks, because most sessions at camps with the Zoom, you don't see who is there. You can see the person that's presenting, so it feels a little bit different. Whereas with the BOF, people were able to speak, and not everybody had their camera on, but many people did, so you could really kind of interact.
It was interesting with the keynote. It was interesting with the keynote this year. We had the Drupal Association Executive Director, Heather Rocker, as our keynote speaker. And looking at our keynote last year as a Q&A, panel discussion, we look at that format as being a break from the day-to-day session. And then we fast forward to this year, and it kind of just dawned on me that the keynote this year was actually a break from the BOF format. Right. So, I think that's really interesting. And we actually had a question and answer after Heather delivered her talk about, the Drupal community and how important it is. We had a Q&A session with her, which it was nice. It kind of broke up the day a little bit and added to the conversation.
John, that's a great point you just brought up. I didn't think of that until you just said it. Is the discussion, like the interactive thing all day, the keynote gave that period of time for people to just sit back and listen, because there is pressure on you as an attendee. It's a different dynamic, right? In a BOF environment, there's a little bit of pressure on you to contribute, right? Yep. There is. You can certainly join a BOF and not say anything, and a lot of people did. But there is a bit of, hey, I need to pay attention and kind of contribute to this discussion. But it was a nice break at that point in the middle of the day to say, I'm just going to sit back and hear what people have to say. So that really is that was a nice mix.
The other format thing that we changed is we had it on Friday. Typically, like we said, we have a 2-day camp, Fridays training, and Saturdays the sessions. But with everything being virtual this year, we thought that Friday would be, the work day would probably be easier for people to attend a virtual conference. And so we changed that bit a little bit too. As we mentioned at the top of the show, this camp started with a smaller team, and over the years it's grown. So we'd like to take a minute to thank the organizers. that have been helping out. So this year we had Abby Bowman, who has been on the show before to talk about ATF. She also, I think, organizes GovCon. Stephen Cross, who the listeners know very well.
Who's that?
We also had Nate Densau, who has also, actually, I'm thinking almost everybody on this list except for one person has been on the show. Nate Densau has been on the show to talk about single sign-on at some point. Leslie Glynn, who has been on the show a few times. Rick Hood, who is joining us.
He's on the show right now.
DJ Catamus helped with social media this year. Myself, Mike Miles, who also helps organize the Boston Drupal meetup, and of course John Picozzi, who again our listeners should know.
Hi everybody, I'm John Picozzi. I think just to kind of give an idea what each of these people kind of did in a really high level. Abby was working on social media and our blog stuff.
Yep.
Stephen was really kind of working with Nate on sponsorship, but also towards the end there kind of stepped in to help me out with a lot of the day of logistics, getting Zoom set up, setting up some keynote presentations. Nate was working on sponsorship. Leslie was just a sounding board and kind of our liaison to the Drupal Association and the greater Drupal community. Helped us get
she helped out with the keynote.
Helped us get, Heather for a keynote, helped us get our t-shirt and mug up on the Drupal swag shop. There'll be a link in the show notes for anybody that wants to buy one of those t-shirts. Rick was our man on the emails. If you got an email from NEDCamp, it came from Rick, and Rick put in tons of effort sending out emails and really, really doing a great job with something that I didn't want to have to think about. DJ did some social media stuff, helping Abby out. Nick was on the website. Mike Miles did a great Q&A with Heather, as well as kind of worked through, thinking about our roadshow, and that's coming back in 2021. We're looking forward to that. And then, I was just kind of keeping everybody moving and motivating folks and pushing everybody forward. So, I think overall, one thing that, looking at this list, always, you always forget at how much goes into putting a camp together. Early on, it was a very small team, and over the years, we figured out that like more people make for an easier time. So, I really look forward to next year and hopefully working with all these people again.
Yeah, we and these things don't happen either without sponsors. Sponsorship
is true.
Sponsors were a bit different this year and easier. And less complicated. So in the past, we would, like most in-person conferences, you have multiple tiers. You have a digital, and we would have you might have like a silver, gold, bronze kind of structure where you try to give more sponsorship based on how much someone pays. This year, it was very straightforward. We had a digital sponsorship, and it was very clear what you would get. You'd get your logo on the website, you'd get mentioned during the conference, and you'd be pointed out during social media and any emails that went out. Yep. Which is what we always did with the in-person stuff too. But we didn't have to deal with tables and signage and things like that.
And I was just going to say, it was one of those decisions that we came to very early on in the process. I feel like was like, hey, what are we going to do about sponsorship? And it was, having one tier, and obviously it's up for debate. I'd love to hear your feedback, but I feel like having one tier really made it easy to sell and easy to just kind of get people on board with.
There is a truth that, putting on a virtual conference is a lot cheaper too. You don't have the venue, you don't have the food, you don't have signage, you don't have all the expenses that you have for in person.
Wait a second. You guys didn't get those pizzas I sent?
Yeah. So we could actually offer us a sponsorship that was really affordable, I think, for companies. Yep. And I think what we saw this year a little bit was we had more proactive signups than we have had in the past. And I think we haven't really discussed it in detail, but I think it's because of the price point and it was very simple and straightforward. This is what you pay, this is what you get. And it was kind of a no-brainer price for companies to sign up for.
And I will
with a good conference.
Yep. Yeah, and to go along with the the sponsorship, obviously we're selling tickets to the event, and I noticed here in our agenda we don't really talk about this, but this conference had a kind of like name your own price ticket. It was either you could sign up and come for free, or you could give us $5 or $1 million. And I think that was part of the. We have sponsors, obviously, and that digital sponsorship Stephen just talked about, but we also have community members that, stepped up and were like, hey, I'll give you guys $100 for your conference ticket. And, I think that was great. And on the flip side, there were people that were like, I can't swing it. I'm going to take the free ticket, which is great because they came and they added to the conversation, and, that was their contribution. So I think all in all,
we had a very high percentage of people who registered that actually donated money. It was very high. I don't know what the number is. I haven't gone back and looked, but it was extremely high.
I think, all in all, it was a great example of the, the community and kind of how communities can work. So with a BOF,
before we leave there, I wasn't done. I just want to mention that. So the conference didn't cost a lot to put on. We had some technology costs. So, but what this has done is it's allowed us to save a little bit of money, because every other year the in-person is always like by the skin of your teeth a lot of times trying to get that conference together. So this has allowed us to have a little bit of a buffer to maybe next year, hoping that we could all get together to have a little bit like of bank in the account to make those future conferences a little bit easier to put on. Rick, did you see the same thing with Nerd Summit?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we bank quite a bit from that.
Yeah, so it makes like the future more positive for the conference, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of camps are seeing that benefit. Obviously everybody wants to get together in person, but I think it does help solidify a future for a lot of camps, which is nice. I think we talked towards the top of the show. BOFCon was the kind of the model that we're following this year, and anytime you throw an event, content is the most important thing, at least in my opinion, or one of the most important things. So, the team got together and we were trying to figure out what is the best way to develop BOFCon. Like, okay, we're going to have people do BOFs. Typically at an event, there's a piece of paper or a whiteboard, and people just sign up for, the BOF that they want to run in a time slot, and maybe people show up, maybe they don't. Well, when you're trying to plan a conference around that model, it's not exactly the easiest thing, because you need people to show up. You need people to be interested in order for it to work. So what we did was we kind of took the session submission approach, and we opened up BOF topic suggestions, a couple of weeks before couple months maybe before the event. And just like sessions, we took those topics and over a period of a couple of weeks, and then we closed it down and we looked at what we had and selected the ones that we were going to run with. I think this actually provided us with a schedule that people could look at and get excited about. It also gave us some stability in the fact that, we had the ability to talk to what we call BOF leaders, people that were leading those BOFs, and train them, in specific, train them that this isn't a session. You're not delivering a presentation. It's a BOF. It's a conversation. So, overall, I think, submitting ahead of time, being able to select those submissions, being able to see who the BOF leaders were and get to know those folks really helped out with the format overall.
one of the things I thought was interesting is this always happens with every camp that we've ever done, the 7 times we've done this, is that when you ask for session submissions, you kind of have in your mind, for us, we have a 1-day session camp. So we kind of figure out 20 slots. And when you push this stuff out there, you're like, oh my God, we don't have enough session submissions coming in. At the end of the day, you always end up with more than what you need. And the same kind of pattern happened with the BOF, right? It was
people always procrastinate to submit.
Yeah.
So it's always like 3 or 4 days before we have 5, and it's like, oh no. And then the day before, and we have,
we had more than we needed, right?
More than we needed, and we were able to select the ones that with, because some of them overlapped, so it doesn't make sense. One of the reasons we took this approach is we needed to allow people to know what they would want to go to. Because like John said, usually BOFs at a conference are just on a whiteboard. So you walking by, something catches your eye, you go show up. So we kind of needed some preparation, and we wanted to make sure that, like I said, we didn't have anything that, we didn't want to have a bunch of overlapping ones, because that's what a BOF is, people talking about the same thing. So we wanted to make sure that they got, a similar time slot and could each kind of provide their point of view and provide some questions.
Do you guys think we had a vast, like a broad selection of options? And part 2 to my question I'm thinking about is, do you think that we had overlapping in a point where people were frustrated because they were sitting in one, but also wanted to hear stuff from another one?
Oh, so yes, yes to both of those. I think there was a good range of topics. I know Rick led a Drupal journey BOF, and Stephen, you led a Linux BOF, and there was a CI/CD BOF and a remote work BOF. So there was a good amount of diversity in the topics. It wasn't like, hey, you're a Drupal developer, here's like Drupal development BOFs all day long. I think that there was some overlap where people were like, I really want to go to this one, and I really want to go to that one, but I can't be in 2 places at once. What do I do? But I also think the format allowed for people, if they were like, this conversation isn't really going where I want it to go, or I don't feel like I'm getting a bunch out of this, that they could have switched. But I don't necessarily think I saw a lot of that. So
yeah, I think it's a lot easier to switch a Zoom room than it is to stand up and walk out of a session and go somewhere else. But I mean,
that's a great point.
You can do it almost silently, right?
Yeah, I think one of the drawbacks of this format, aside from the fact that it wasn't in person to get to see people that usually you see in person, and you didn't have the hallway track, was that we didn't record the sessions. So normally, if there's 2 sessions you want to go to at the same time, or 3 sessions, we've recorded those in the past, and you can always just go back and catch it later. You can always catch up with somebody at the conference and be like, hey, how'd that go? And ask maybe the session presenter any questions that maybe you had. But because this was a group discussion, we were a bit concerned about how we didn't want to record that. We wanted to make sure that people felt the ability to speak openly, not have to worry about it being recorded and analyzed at some other point. So we didn't record the BOF sessions, and that was an intentional decision. So I think that was one of the big things about this camp that was like, you know what, I wanted to go to both of these, and I can't even listen to the other one. But I think it was the right decision. No, I would probably make the same decision going forward, but it was definitely one of the drawbacks.
So interesting. One of the BOFs, the leader actually asked if they could record it, and they did a recording. And I was looking at the recording the other day, and it was interesting. It could be something for next year to think about. Seeing if we can get permission from everybody to record it, or if people feel comfortable, possibly going down that road. But
John, that's news to me. There was someone who recorded a BOF.
Yes.
And it was approved by everyone who was sitting in the room that it was recorded?
Yes. he asked everybody before he hit the record button.
Interesting.
We didn't release that though, right?
No. I have the video. I shared the video with him, but I wouldn't put it out publicly.
Interesting. Okay. I'm surprised that we allowed that after we had decided as a group that we were not going to allow that. That's a surprise.
I think this is a point for discussion because we discussed it day of too, and that wasn't this is a point for discussion.
Sorry, I thought everybody was aware. I think DJ mentioned it in the NEDCamp Slack.
I don't know if it's a big deal or not, but one reason not to record it would be to encourage people to show up.
Yeah, well, it was also a policy, right? The policy was we were not recording.
Yeah.
But then to allow someone to record it seems like it's against what we all decided what the camp wasn't doing. So
yeah. I mean, my thing was like, hey, if you got everybody's permission, then like,
yeah, but then you run into the problem of, hey, why was this one recorded and none of the other ones were? Because the only reason to record it is to share it, so it would be shared. Right. So I mean, I think my impression was that the leader just wanted to be able to review the feedback and the conversation after the fact. I don't know that it was for public release. It is an interesting thing in our feedback section below. I have a note to talk about that. Is how could we facilitate that in the future? For the people who attended, how could they get access to it, and not make it a public thing? Because the idea of not recording is because they're conversations, and we want people to share. We don't want it to be public, but yet people who are there might want it to refer back to, and how what's the balance there? I think it's an interesting thing. Yeah.
It's definitely something to work on. So in the beginning of this section, I talked about, BOF leaders, and, we took a very, I don't know if it was strict or if it was casual, but it was somewhere in the middle of requiring BOF leaders to do a mandatory training.
Yeah.
And that was simply to, one, make sure they were serious about leading a BOF, but also to prepare them for that experience. Cause for some, it was relatively new, right? So part of that, BOF leader training was, just giving them some tips to make the BOF a success. Have questions ready in case the conversation stalls was one tip. They were there to make sure that the code of conduct was being upheld. And again, as I said, we wanted to remind them that, hey, it wasn't a session. You're not supposed to be doing a ton of talking. You're supposed to be facilitating a meaningful and enriching conversation. So, turning this to, I happen to on the call here have two BOF leaders that were there. Rick, just interested to know what the experience was as a BOF leader. Was it hard? Was it easy? Was it fun? Was it a chore?
It was easy, and I think it's way easier to be a BOF leader than to come up with a session and do all the slides and all that jazz. I also think really critical is have really good discussion questions. So I thought that since ours were 45 minutes long, it would be good to have 3 discussion questions that split it up into 15-minute set segments. Because like your Drupal journey, what does that mean? But I had 3 different questions to sort of walk people through that. And I think the whole bunch of things about that. One is that it helps structure the conversation. Another is that people can know up front what exactly you're going to be talking about and can maybe be thinking about that before they get there. And and it just helps make it not be a session and more like a BOF.
And I mean, I'm assuming it was fun for you to be in that role and leading that BOF.
Yeah, it was really fun. There weren't many people there. I think I had 5, but there's pros and cons. We should talk about that sometime, like what's good, a smaller BOF or bigger BOF. The good thing about that was everybody had plenty of time to talk. If I had 20 people, there wouldn't have been enough time for everyone to talk. But then The bad thing about 5 is that if you're shy, you may feel more pressure because there's only 5 of you there.
Right.
So you may feel more pressure to talk.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you kind of feel like 20 people might be okay if 5 or 10 of them don't really want to talk and just want to listen, right?
Yeah.
So Stephen, what was your experience like?
So I came into this because I've done a BOF on Linux development in the past, and it's never been a very populated BOF, I could say. Like you kind of like not so many people are interested in Linux, but I was shocked to see that I think I had 13 people that showed up. What I thought was super helpful was the training that we did ahead of time. Even though I was sort of involved in the camp and knew what it was going to be, I attended the training as I was supposed to. It was really helpful in terms of setting like what my agenda would be and how I should like handle the BOF. So I thought that was helpful. I do have a tendency to kind of try to take over the conversation, which I think was a challenge for me a little bit because I felt I had answers to all the questions. And I really wanted other people to respond to. So I was forcing myself during the BOF to be quiet, which I think I should do as a leader. What was super helpful to me was having the intros ahead of time. And it sounds like there's a lot of intros with 13 people. I think at the point we did the intros, there were probably 10 people currently connected. But what it did was I wrote down, because I asked people to introduce who they were, what they were trying to learn that day. It basically set the agenda for the 45 minutes. So it was very similar to the questions I had pre-prepared, but basically I had like 5 things that came out of those introductions of things people wanted to learn. And I feel like we touched on all of them and got input from everybody on those topics. So I thought it was super successful. I was really happy with it.
I mean, it's super interesting because I've seen both in the NEDCamp Drupal Slack and in our Talking Drupal Slack on the Drupal Slack. There are a lot of words in there. Questions about Linux and about setups and about those sorts of things. So that definitely was a hot topic for folks. Trying to learn more about that and switch away from maybe their Mac or Windows based systems.
Yeah,
so,
there was one person who actually did it over the weekend. Took a laptop, installed Linux on it, and moved their development environment over to it, and was super excited. So, I mean, that like made my day, like my month. Like to have one person see the light was super fun for me.
Yeah, 1 out of 13 isn't bad. Those aren't bad odds, especially when you're trying to hawk something like Linux.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick minute and chat maybe about the technology, because we spent a lot of time talking about how we could put on a virtual camp successfully, and we considered a bunch of different platforms. We considered Hopin, which is what the Drupal Association used for DrupalCon this year. I don't remember all the others, but in the end, we settled on kind of just straight up Zoom rooms, because once we kind of quickly moved away from the session idea, having the ability for people to see each other and talk. And, one of the important things is people use cues to know when somebody's trying to jump into a conversation. And so, being able to have cameras for everybody, I think really facilitated communication as well. So we ended up getting one room for each BOF. I think John had the idea. Was that your idea to name the rooms after the states?
Yeah, I was like, oh, we could do like Zoom Room 1, Zoom Room 2. And then I was like, well, if we use 6 rooms, we can name one after each state. So yeah, that was me.
Good idea. And since we had, we're New England, it really made sense. It also made sense. It's much easier to say, hey, go to Connecticut than it is to say, go to Zoom Room 3, like John said, or even, so I think that was a good format. Connecticut ended up being the general hangout room. So we had one room for each BOF. And then we had a dedicated room that was open most of the day, just so that if people didn't have a particular BOF they wanted to be in, or they wanted to continue a conversation, and then we also had a short time before and after the conference, people could go there and kind of chat. And then we had one dedicated to the keynote, and the keynote one was a webinar because it was a more traditional keynote. It was a great keynote, by the way. That was recorded, I believe, and will be released.
It was.
So if you want to hear,
It'll be released before. By the time this is out, I'll have the link to it in the show notes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So if you want to learn, what Heather Rocker thinks about the community and where the community is headed, it was a good talk about that.
Hey, maybe this isn't the place for the discussion, but what do you guys think about kicking Connecticut out of New England? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Whoa,
Wait,
whoa!
What?
I don't know.
This is deep.
Fans. There's a lot of Yankees fans and Giants fans and stuff. It feels like they should be kicked out.
I got relatives in Connecticut, and they are Red Sox fans. So
Okay, all right.
I don't know.
My sister's in Connecticut, and she's helped out with this camp up until this year. But I don't know, man. Just feels like they're too much part of New York to me.
Wow. Send your complaints to Stephen Cross at.
I am just kidding, guys. All right.
I'm speechless.
Let's talk about Slack channels.
Yeah, so we also created a NEDCamp Slack channel, which is obviously still there on the Drupal Slack, because we wanted people to be able to chat in between sessions and have a semi-preserved history as well, because people obviously were chatting in the Zoom rooms, but Zoom room to Zoom room, once you're switching Zoom rooms, it's hard to kind of keep a conversation going. So I think that was pretty successful. It also allowed us to help out anybody that had any trouble connecting to Zoom, which I don't think people actually had trouble. I think at this point, everybody is a Zoom expert, at least joining Zoom rooms.
We did a bit of Slack support in the Slack room, right?
Yeah. So we decided instead of creating our own Slack organization and having everybody sign up for that, we decided to use Drupal's existing Slack organization and just create channel for NEDCamp. There were some pros and cons with this. One of the pros that I felt was, it helped us build good community, right? We were hitting people where they already were. They were in Drupal Slack. Being able to join the NEDCamp channel made it easier for them to be able to join that and get going.
And if they weren't in Drupal Slack, it drove them to joining that community.
It got them to join. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think it was a win for the Drupal community. And, the one downfall that we saw was that there were a lack of customizations because we didn't own the organization. We couldn't add, plugins and different widgets and whatnot to that Slack channel. Granted, we could have worked with the Drupal Association and the Drupal community to possibly get those added. But ultimately, I think we were able to use, Slack reminders, which we taught Stephen about, to share the schedule and the links with everybody. So I think overall the Slack channel was really good, and we did do a little bit of Slack support at some points. As Nick said, we had a general hangout room for everybody, and sometimes people would come in and be like, "Yeah, how do I get onto the Slack thing?" So we would kind of walk through the process, but overall, I think it worked out pretty well. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I think it was a smart decision.
Yeah, it was the right way to go. We also linked each BOF on the website. The schedule had a link to the Zoom room directly on there, so that people didn't have to be like, "Oh, it's in Connecticut. Where's the link for Connecticut?" They could just click on the link. We password protected every room because anybody who's had a public Zoom room in the last year knows you just can't have public Zoom rooms on the internet. So they were all password protected. We just sent the password to all of the attendees the day right before. And then anybody who signed up the day of, I think we sent it to them in Slack. And I don't think we had any issues with that, did we?
No, I think there were a couple of people that thought registration might close before the event, but I just was like, listen, registration's still open. We're going to open it back up. You just go back and you register, and we'll get you the link.
We probably had 15 maybe registrations during the event. People who we started at 8 a.m. that were registering during the day. So
Yeah.
we did have a little glitch when the registration closed on the morning of, but we opened it back up.
Yeah, which, really worked out. It allowed people to kind of get in, like latecomers to get in there and get into the event and to do a BOF. Even if they wanted to come in for one BOF. I mean, I think there were probably people that just came in for one or two and the keynote and kind of ducked out. One BOF leader did ask for closed captioning for their BOF. And Stephen was instrumental in finding a service called Rev. And basically what Rev does is it adds right into Zoom. And you sign up for a Rev account, you add your email of your Zoom account, and then you pay your monthly fee, and you have the ability to basically integrate closed captioning right into Zoom. So that was actually a pretty useful tool, pretty easy to set up. Also allows for webinar closed captioning. So once we got that all up and running, we were pretty off to the races with the closed captioning, and it was pretty accurate from the couple of times that I looked at it. So that was a good find.
Yeah, I kept it up all day, and it was. I mean, I would say it was greater than 95% accurate. It was eerily accurate for.
Well, it's interesting because they only
machine.
guarantee 80%, so they were doing better than their guarantee.
John,
the one thing that
how was that? How was the pricing for that? Was that it was based on the number of hosts?
$20 per Zoom account. So
gotcha. For a month.
For a month. Yep. Okay. So it ended up being, we had 6 Zoom accounts.
Cost us $120 to do closed captioning for one day.
Yep. And it was pretty reliable. We did find that after a while, it got disconnected somehow. But, had we just restarted those rooms, we would have been able to get it back up and running pretty quickly. So
there is a Drupal initiative that's going on, and I don't recall the name of it right now, to provide this kind of service in the future. So, maybe we can look at that in the future. It didn't work out for us this time, but maybe it will later.
It's amazing how inexpensive all this stuff is.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
It is crazy. Yep.
It's super interesting.
And I'm not sure how this next point ended up with me, since I think I'm the least gear-oriented person on the show. But as you mentioned at the top of the show, we were able to get some gear on the Drupal swag shop. So if you are interested in supporting the Drupal Association, or just get another NEDCamp t-shirt, although the style isn't on there for those looking at the camera, you can go to the Drupal swag shop and look up the NEDCamp gear.
I will say we don't have a NEDCamp. We don't have a NEDCamp sweatshirt, but the sweatshirts on the Drupal swag shop are some of the most comfortable sweatshirts that I think I've ever worn. So that's a shameless plug for sweatshirts.
And one of the key things about the swag is that this is coming from the Drupal swag shop. So this is not putting money in for proceeds. Don't go to NEDCamp. They go to the Drupal Association, which I think was really cool way to do this for us. Is it was easy to set up. There's volunteers who are working on it, like any other Drupal initiative, that are making it happen. And the proceeds, which is like on a $20 item, is like $5. So for anything that was purchased, like $5 is going to go to the Drupal Association.
Yeah, that was really important for us because of the year that the DA has had with all the initiatives for fundraising. Part of our goal for this year was to try to help out the Drupal Association in some way, shape, or form. We had originally talked about making a straight donation, ticket, proportion of ticket prices, so on and so forth. And, this was really like a great way for us to be able to support them and say like, hey, everybody usually comes to our camp. Everybody usually gets a t-shirt. Clearly we're not going to do that this year. Stephen would have boxes of t-shirts in his house now because we wouldn't have been able to give them all out. and just it made a lot of sense to be able to support the Drupal Association in this way. And I am now like a perennial user of the Drupal swag shop, so that's kind of speaks to my own personal problems with t-shirt buying.
The print on demand is great because you're not stuck with old t-shirts.
Right, exactly.
And I actually have for the video watchers, I have the coffee mug here that works great, looks great, and keeps my coffee warm. So,
and big news, Talking Drupal shirts will be there shortly.
All right.
Great. Just another reason for me to go spend another $50
Exactly.
at the swag shop.
Okay, so let's move on to our like kind of thoughts and random feedback from how the day went. So we kind of talked about mostly the planning and the decisions we made leading up to the camp. I'm curious to know first. So we've done 6 years in person, 1 year virtual. In my opinion, the effort for the virtual camp was nowhere near what it is for the in-person.
Absolutely.
I'm curious as to what you guys think about that.
Absolutely. I agree. I think it was good because, I mean, with, coronavirus, I mean, everybody has a lot of stuff on their plates already on top of what people normally have. So there's a lot of effort that goes into planning the camp, and the fact that we could, not that it wasn't easy, not that it was easy, because there was still a lot of effort expended to get this done. But the level of effort was certainly reduced. And I think that, I think that I would have struggled to put in what we normally would put in this year. If the level of effort was the same, it would have been much more mentally stressful than the average year, because we already have a lot on our plates. And I think that was one of the reasons we decided to go virtual too, because we didn't know what was going to happen. And to have to make that change at the last minute, because, if we had been in person, there's no way we could have been in person this year anyway, even if we had decided to. So I think it was the right decision. I think the format was fantastic. I mean, there certainly were things that were missed. And I think the primary thing that I missed was, there were people that attended the camp that you see in the hallway, or you see at lunch, or you see at the beginning, and you just get a chance to catch up, even if you don't have you're not in any sessions with them, or you don't go to their session.
Yep.
And because there were Zoom rooms, there really wasn't a hallway. So there were a couple people that went to the camp that normally I'd say hi to, that I didn't really have a chance to catch up with them, because we just happened to choose different BOFs throughout the whole day.
I found myself following up with people either in Slack or on LinkedIn in that, that same way, like, hey, I know you were in NEDCamp. Sorry that I missed you, would love to connect. I think I definitely underestimated the level of effort in a virtual BOF. But, everything you said, Nick, I agree with. I think, it was definitely easier than an in-person BOF. An in-person camp. But it was definitely, for me, it was definitely harder than I thought it was going to be. I think,
John, I think part of that is like you this year were like leading the thing. So you saw a different perspective of the camp, which we're going to talk about more in a few minutes. Rick, I'm interested, like you kind of shook your head up and down when we said it was, because you've done both now, right? You've run both the in-person and the virtual. What like jumps out to you as like the main differences?
For me, by far, the biggest stress for the physical camp is the day of, running around, making sure everything's ready, are all the projectors in the room working, things like that. And just worrying about what's going wrong in these rooms that are like a 5-minute walk from me, is something going wrong there. So you just don't kind of have to worry about that with virtual. You don't have to have the signs. You don't have to have the name tags. You don't have to have the food. There's so much stuff you don't have to do for a virtual.
I mean, the food's a big one.
You're removing the necessity to make the personal experience good, because you're not like hosting something. You're not a host anymore, right? People are hosting themselves at home. The logistics of the food in the rooms and the printing of the shirts, the printing of the materials, the stuffing,
name tags,
the stuffing of the bags, the name tags, the lanyards, the like. When you add all that stuff up, it is an immense amount of physical work, which all kind of disappears. It doesn't mean it's necessarily easy for the virtual camp, but the amount of physical work is completely different.
I would say that you're still trying to make it personal, but it's a lot less, as you said, physical work.
Yeah.
And I think typically I'm the guy on the day of for our camp that's kind of running around, making sure things are going as planned. And this year there was a lot less of that, right? And it kind of left me with a feeling of like, all right, what did I miss? Because I feel like there should be more going on right now.
You had more computers open.
Well, so I will say, and that's an interesting point too, is it gives you an insight into each room without having to actually leave your home, right? So, talking about setup for a little bit, Stephen and I each had a Zoom room open on various systems. So I had a laptop and my desktop open with 2 rooms. Stephen had a couple of laptops open with 2 or 3 rooms. And, it really allowed us to kind of be in each room as the day was going on without having to actually do that running from room to room. So, I think one thing, I dropped into our show notes here is how this is going to impact the future format of the camp, right? And it's something that, came up, last night on the Drupal event organizers monthly meeting. Somebody was saying how great the NEDCamp format was, and my response there was it was great, and it's kind of making the wheels turn as to how we integrate BoffCon going forward, and how we make that a part of both an in-person camp and a virtual or a hybrid camp, depending on what the future holds. So I think this was a great experience overall, and I think it's gonna enhance the camp going forward, definitely.
So I'm curious. Sorry, Nick.
No, I was going to say.
So I'm curious if anyone has any general comments, like what in your mind went good, what went bad, where could we improve moving forward? Let's start with you, Rick.
Where I would improve is to enforce that people have really good discussion questions, so that they have 3 good discussion questions and that they stick to them and ideally publish them in advance. One good thing about that is if for some reason they can't show up, somebody else can pick up the ball pretty easily. Then the other thing is maybe we could have thought of some fun things to do in an after party thing. Like 2 weeks ago, I'm on the board of the Amherst Education Foundation, and we ran a trivia bee, which we usually do in person, but we had 24 teams in 24 breakout rooms, and we would ask the question. They'd all go into their rooms for a minute to discuss the answer, then come back out and see what the answer was. So we could do things like trivia bee or whatever. So
I will say that I did use the breakout room functionality at NEDCamp once to answer some questions for somebody. And that's definitely something that I want to investigate, maybe using more going forward, because it was super easy to use and super easy to kind of drop people into breakout rooms. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
We did not have an after party. So I'm curious, you just mentioned that, Rick. I'm curious what you guys think about, was that a miss on our part? My personal opinion on it is I've been on Zoom since 8:00 in the morning.
Yep.
At 5:00, I'm done. While I love everyone and I would love to just chat, I mean, it feels like it's a long day. And it just, to me, it's an after party when you're at a physical location, like you're winding down, you're having a cocktail, having a little bit of food, completely different thing. To play a game online at the end of the day, just to me, after a long conference day, seems to be too much.
So I think I was with you, and that's why we decided to kind of like pull the after party. I was with you with like Zoom fatigue, but it was interesting because we kept one of the rooms open a little bit longer, and people did kind of move in there.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been interesting to have. Not an after party per se, but like a coffee break or whatever you want to call it, right? Where people could have gotten together and continued the conversation at 5:00 Eastern when they wanted to. And what I would say to kind of Rick's point is maybe hosting an event later on. So give people that break for dinner, or that break just to kind of move away from the computer for a couple hours, and then say, hey, later on tonight, we're going to open up a room and we're all gonna do trivia or play Jackbox games or whatever the format might be. I think it's a great idea. And I was with you completely with you, Stephen. I was like, no more Zoom, I'm all done. But seeing the interest in having a couple of people ask throughout the day would kind of like changed my perspective on that a little bit.
So, John, how about you? Like overall impressions, things went well, didn't go well. What you'd like to improve on? The key one for you?
So I think, overall, I think things went great. There was a very low barrier to entry for people, getting great feedback about how easy it was to kind of get into the rooms. What could be improved on? I think I have to think about a little bit more. I think that things went really well, and I think what the improvements are going to be, maybe we have more BOF sessions. Maybe we were a little bit stricter or more structured with our BOF leader training and how we select BOFs, BOF leaders. I think overall, just personally, my own personal organization and driving of the bus, if you will, could be better. So, yeah, I think we have to look to see what could be improved. At least that's my standpoint.
How about you, Nick?
Yeah, I think overall it's a success. I mean, there's always things to improve upon. I think one thing that could be improved upon is a better way to help the BOF leader to determine when introductions are appropriate or not. I think the cutoff point is like 12-ish people. If there's 12 people, if there's less than 12 people, you can get through the intros in 5-10 minutes. But if there's more than that, it just cuts into too much time for the actual BOF.
We had said 10, I think, was like over 10 people. Like don't.
Yeah, there were a couple that were more than, and then maybe just giving the BOF leader something to giving the BOF leader something to say beforehand, because there were a couple of people. This is typical in general, but there were a couple of people that their intro went on for a couple of minutes.
Right.
And so, just having something up front where they could say, hey, quick 10-second intro, what's your name? What do you do? Like, give the BOF leaders like a question to ask. So it's just a succinct like introduction. Because I think the intros are important because it gets people talking and lets people know who's who. But there was at least one BOF that I went to where 30% of it was taken up.
Right.
It's interesting because you can you got to give up a little bit of that control, as Stephen was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like, we can you can give them guidelines and training, but once you're in the room on the stage, it's kind of like, maybe that stuff goes out the window or maybe it doesn't. I think, next year, one thing that could be improved is the food.
Funny, we were going to add. We were thinking about adding that to the survey as a joke, but so my impressions of the day I thought it was way better of a camp. Like, having people interact was so far superior to me than sessions. like I'm going to propose in our meeting coming up, recap meeting, that NEDCamp becomes a BOFCon moving forward. I think it's different.
Interesting.
I thought it was fantastic. I think we're onto something that we could tweak, because BOFs are always a little piece of a camp and kind of a throwaway item. That this camp could be a BOFCon camp.
Steve, we're going to have to edit this out now so other people don't take our ideas.
I love it.
No, that's the great thing about the Drupal community. I mean, people can share ideas.
No,
I mean,
BOFCon should be proprietary.
And Steven, you're taking my idea. I mean, I not to devolve this discussion. I mean, I think it definitely has a permanent place at NEDCamp. I don't know that we replace every session, because I think there's something to be said for sessions, but
there's lots of places to get sessions.
Exactly.
That's true. That's true.
I think the interesting part is that we're all on the same wavelength there.
Yeah.
So it's going to come down to format and what we do moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think it was fantastic. I mean, it didn't drag. I mean, we had not that the in-person camp ever felt like it dragged, but it was one thing I was very concerned about, that by the second or third one, it'd be like, oh, I have to go to another one. But even the ones that I was a moderator in, and it's one, I was just helping out, and wasn't one that I would choose to go to if I was an attendee. Like, the discussions were fantastic. They pulled me in, and every single one kind of flew by. And like I said, lunchtime came around and it was like, I would say, one thing I think we do need to figure out, and this is more of an issue if it's virtual again, is we need to figure out a mixer. It doesn't have to be an after party, but we do need to find a way to get people to see. We need to find a way to replicate the, who's at the camp, say hi to the people you see at camps, kind of thing, and forge those new relationships.
It's interesting. I'm putting this together now in my head as you're saying that, but I was on a Bureau of Digital mixer, basically a networking event a couple months ago, last month maybe, and they were using this service called ROM, something like that. And it was basically that, Nick. It basically let people, kind of like a breakout room, jump off into different tables and with different topics. So could be something that we add to our technology stack next year to be able to do something like that.
So John, I think one of the final things as we get ready to close out, you mentioned earlier that you kind of were the bus driver this year. I'm curious to hear what you thought about, for the people following along. Steven's kind of taken the lead for NEDCamp for the first 6 years, and John took over the reins this year. And so I'm just curious to hear how that experience was.
So, I think I definitely have a newfound respect for all the work that Steven put in over the first 6 years, and it'll be interesting next year if we go hybrid, if we go virtual, if we go in person, to see how the role changes, and how much more stuff I can feel like I'm dropping the ball on. I think ultimately, we had a successful camp, and I'm very thankful for that. But I look at it as very much, the team did a great job getting everything done and making us look good. I personally constantly kind of had this feeling of like, what am I forgetting? And, oh man, am I missing something? And, I think, my job is to help the team succeed. And, I think we did that. And I'll be clearly the dog agrees. I think overall it's going to be interesting. One of the topics for our recap meeting on Thursday is kind of like a rating of my performance, and I'll be interested to see what the feedback there is, because I think that's really how I'm gonna know if I did all right, is based on what the team thought. So,
John, I can give you a little hint to this right now. You did a great job. I mean, you did exactly what you supposed to do. The camp ran really smoothly, everything went fine. You stayed on top of everyone doing their things. I mean, it was a well executed camp.
Well, that's good. I'm
It was
glad.
Fantastic.
I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that, and maybe it's my own self doubt that gets that motivation going. I don't know, but I'm glad to hear that everybody thought I did well. And you know what? I think I would recommend it. I would recommend it to folks if you're thinking about running a camp. Jump in there and do it.
Yeah, find a few people around you that you can trust and work well with, and get one rolling if you can. Hey, if you have any questions or feedback regarding this episode or any other, you can always reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can hit us up on the Drupal Slack at Talking Drupal, or hash Talking Drupal, I guess is the way to say that. There's been a lot of activity there recently, which has been fun. You can also always email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. There is a newsletter. There hasn't been many coming out, but we reserve that right to email you when it's something important. So you can sign up for it at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And as always, we would like to thank our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support's greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar.
And Kitaku's going to make this outro interesting. So thank you again, Rick, for joining us to talk about camps again. If our listeners have any questions for you or like to reach out to you, where can they do that?
Yeah, I work at Common Media, which is commonmedia.com. And then I'm Rick Hood on the Twitter.
And Stephen, where can our listeners reach you?
Stephen Cross on Twitter with a PH.
And John?
You can find me on all the social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. You can find out about me at johnpicozzi.com, and you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
And you can reach me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN. And this week we have a special ending today. We're going to close the show with one of Rick's tracks. Here we are.
Remember, if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.
till we see the sunlight.